Good morning. Week 7, we are talking about the fourth style in the long 19th century, the age of the bustle or tournure. So, as you may recall from the previous weeks, last week we started talking about the styles during the reign of Queen Victoria. She came to the throne as a young 18-year-old girl. She mostly followed the fashion in her youth. Then in 1861, just at the height of the crinoline period, disaster struck and her beloved husband Prince Albert died after a short illness in December 1861. Queen Victoria plunged into very deep depression. She didn't show herself publicly for something like 10 years. And after she was seen again, she wore very characteristic clothes of a widow, the so-called widow's weeds or mourning clothes. We will talk about it when we talk about special uses of clothing, but today I'd like to talk with you about the mainstream fashions. So Victoria was a little bit out of the picture in the 70s, the 80s, and that is the age of the bustle, but there were other fashionable ladies who influenced the style. You may recall we ended our discussion last week mentioning Victoria's daughters and her very beautiful and fashionable daughter-in-law, the Princess of Wales, Alexandra. Later, when King Edward VII came to the throne, she became Queen Alexandra, the Danish princess who married the Prince of Wales. So we have these women. We also have something quite new, something connected with the development of the photography, the art of photography, and the mass reproduced images that could be bought and collected. They were very fashionable pieces to be collected by people, by the middle class mostly. So what we have is a new type of women, the so-called professional beauties. So they could be socialites, aristocratic ladies who are especially admired for their style and charm, or they could be actresses or opera singers or other performers. Such an international star was, for example, French actress Sarah Bernhardt. There were some internationally famous opera singers such as Adelina Patti, who retired to Britain. She bought a house or a palace really in Wales, so later in her life she lived in Wales. Probably the most famous British actress of this period would be Lily Langtry, one of the many mistresses of the Prince of Wales, who later continued her professional career on stage. These women were known from the stage. They were also known from art, from paintings. They were models for artists quite often, and models for photographic portraits that could be bought by the general populace, let's put it this way. We have the inspiration taken from the theatre, so not only the personalities of the performers, but the subject matter of popular theatre plays and novels, especially historical plays and novels, that might encourage a fashion or a short-lived fad to take inspirations from a particular period in history. For example, in the early 70s, Charles Dickens painted one of his very few historical novels called Barnaby Rudge, set in the 1780s, and the main character there was called Dolly Varden. She was a young woman and her clothes were described in the novel. So this introduced inspired fashions, which started to be called the Dolly Varden fashions in the mainstream fashion of the early 1870s. So 1871, 1872. This was a kind of late 18th century inspired costume with the so-called shepherdess style straw hat and a dress with a polonaise looped up over a relatively simple underskirt. This was quite informal. This was a passing fad, but you can still see it in the fashion plates and portraits and magazine cartoons, punch cartoons of this period. We are not really going to talk a lot about these seasonal variations and fads, but I'm giving you this example to draw your attention to one thing. Fashion, after the decline of the crinoline, becomes much faster in pace. The changes are perhaps not huge, but they are very frequent. And the rich sections of the society, the women from the upper middle class and the upper class, follow these changes more carefully adhering to the codes of fashion becomes an important status symbol in the late Victorian period. If we think about the decline of the crinoline, one of the main reasons was the popularization of the home sewing machine, the democratization of the crinoline itself, including the dress improver, the crinoline frame, so that true ladies, as they could define themselves, were not so easy to distinguish from ambitious and, let's say, talented, if they could sue themselves, women from the lower sections of the society. So, of course, the cultural reaction was for the true ladies to try to get the kinds of clothes that would not be easy to reproduce at home, something that would require a lot of stitching, even with the sewing machine, something that would definitely require the skills at a professional level, so not something that fairly skilled housewife could do and look fashionable, modern and elegant. So what we have in the 70s, in the bustle period, is the greater pace of fashion, the greater complication of fashion, the greater complication of the customs connected with clothes as well, so greater specialization of fashion. This is the moment when many women start to feel positive social changes regarding their role in the society. So young women from rich families can participate in more leisure activities, including sports, than previous generations. They are more likely to have higher education. Some of them might even start to be trained with the prospect of having a professional career after finishing their education. So becoming a wife and mother is not, let's say, the default thing for a middle-class young woman to do. This is one of the options, still the option that for many women provided the best, let's say, financial security and social prestige, but it's not the only thing. So what we have is more mobile society, more urban society, with some new forms of leisure, for example, shopping in the department stores. Those new, big, glamorous shopping galleries in which you could wander for a long time among different fashionable luxury products. You could see and observe without even having the necessity to buy things. So window shopping with beautiful shop windows became something popular in the cities. And of course, if we look at the fashionable clothes from this period, they are not as broad and not as let's say difficult to operate in the city environment as the crinoline skirts were, especially the day clothes during the late Victorian period, so in the Bustle period and then in the Belle Epoque. They are increasingly more and more sensible. So the skirts are not as voluminous as they were. They might have still some decorative elements, but they are pushed to the back of the figure rather than let's say occupying a lot of space around the wearer. So that is why the crinoline is replaced by the crinolet and then by the bustle. So the woman would still look traditionally feminine, and especially a rich woman would still look very ornamental in the society, but she wouldn't take up as much space as a woman in a similar social situation, but generation or two earlier. So what we have is the tension between two tendencies, one towards greater comfort and practicality and a modern lifestyle, gradually including women more and more. The other is the traditionally understood femininity, stressing the feminine figure, stressing the wealth and social position through clothes, which becomes even more important in the Bustle period than it was in the crinoline period. So it's really focusing on the display of wealth, but to a certain extent, as it was with the crinoline, the display of those traditional values through modern means. And this means the narrowing of the skirt, the use of another technical innovation in the form of the bustle or tournure, so a new type of dress improver to modify the shape of the skirt. And that's basically it. The whole period, which is, as you can see, around 20 years long, can be divided into three subsections. The first bustle, the period between the first and the second bustle, and then the second bustle. So the bustle itself comes into fashion in the very late 60s or early 70s. Then it goes out of fashion after a few years, the turn of the 80s, really, so very late 70s and early 80s. We have the period sometimes called the princess dress, or the natural form dress, or sometimes called the late Victorian neoclassicism, because it comes back to the column shape of the classical period, but this time of course with the corset, with the very traditionally feminine figure, even though the corset is really the only dress improvers that shapes the figure here. And then we have the second bustle, which is similar in the way that the bustle itself returns to fashion for a few years in the 80s. And but the shape of the bustle itself, and especially the other decorations of the garment and the headwear, the hairstyles, so all the accessories, they are visibly different. So it may be a little bit tricky to date, let's say, the clothes, the fashion plates from the period, but if you know what details to look for, it's not that impossible, it's not that difficult. So some elements of the first bustle period. So what we have is of course the bustle itself, which could be worn for day and evening. For day, sometimes the dresses themselves are relatively short, so walking length dresses. For evening, increasingly, these are dresses with trains, because everything in this fashion draws the viewer's attention towards the back. So we have the pronounced back of the skirt in the form of the bustle, sometimes extended into the train, and also we have very elaborate hairstyles, especially the hairstyle known as the chignon, which is a huge and sometimes really prominent big bun of arranged and braided hair at the back of the head. So it's like another bulge, another protrusion, seen best from the back, but this time the back of the head rather than the back of the skirt. This is the fashion that favored women with beautiful long natural hair, such as Empress Sissi of Austria, but of course not all women, and in fact few women had such great quality of hair, but the chignon was extremely fashionable. So many women used hair extensions, so let's say artificial hair pieces, to add up to their natural hair volume. Of course they do not have plastic, so all these hair extensions were made of natural human hair, but it wasn't the hair of the wearer. And that is why you have the practice that is sometimes reported in 19th century literature of poorer women, especially poor young women who happened to have beautiful long hair, selling their hair to be made into wigs and hair extensions for the rich women. Another novelty is the popularization of high-heeled shoes, probably for the first time ever since the 18th century. What you have, for example, here in this Punch cartoon, is the new fashionable figure called the Grecian bend. As you can see, the back of the woman here is not straight. She is somehow bent forward with those big protrusions of the chignon and the bustle. Her bust is made more prominent by this posture, and she's wearing high heels. You can see she's wearing a walking skirt, so you can see the shoes. She's wearing high heels. That is why very often ladies did not feel comfortable walking in these costumes, so they might use a parasol or an umbrella, a tightly furled umbrella, as a kind of walking stick for extra support, as this lady is carrying a parasol or umbrella. Of course, the point of humor here is that the Grecian band and the early bustle fashion, just as any fashion at any time when it is popular, was supposed to look natural and to enhance the natural beauty and to promote the elegant natural figure, but of course the understanding of what was elegant and natural changes from one style to another, as the next fashion cartoon shows. Here we have the very famous classical sculpture from the Louvre in France of the Venus of Milo, and around this sculpture we have a whole gathering of modern fashionably dressed women who criticize the classical sculpture for all the assumed ugly details, like the fact that the figure has relatively a natural, of course it's a nude, so it really shows the natural body, but the waist is broad, it's not corseted, so it's truly natural, and the head without the big bun of hair looks small, and the buttocks are not especially pronounced. So this is a natural nude sculpture of a beautiful woman, but for the modern fashionable ladies, she is neither natural nor beautiful. She is, as they say here, she's no lady, because her figure does not suit the current ideal. If we look at the 70s, there is one name of an artist to remember, just as much as you could remember Franz Xaver Winterhalter for the crinoline period. We have the artist called James Tissot, a French artist, but he moved to England and he spent much of his career in England. And he made his name portraying women and contemporary scenes with fashionable people mostly in the bustle period. So if you want good artistic representations of the bustle period, James Tissot is a very interesting artist to check out. Here we have the Dolly Varden costume, but of course this is a contemporary scene from the 19th century. We have what looks like a lovers meeting, and a young woman is wearing this costume. We have quite a lot of paintings showing fashionable, young, beautiful, rich people, and especially women, in all kinds of high-class social situations. Here we have some fragments. You may want to Google James Tissot for more examples and whole paintings, but here you have, for example, a fragment of a painting called Too Early, which is, they sometimes have quite a lot of humor. A thing that happened very often in his paintings is that you have several ladies looking very rich and fashionable coming to a social occasion wearing identical clothes. And much has been done in art history about that. So was Tissot making a point here, or were these women supposed to be twin sisters, Or was it a social criticism about, I don't know, fashionable ladies trying to look original, but they all use the same dressmaker, so they end up looking identical? Or basically this is what fashion does to you, you'd end up looking identical. So here we have too early. So the people here, we have mostly women dressed up for a ball. They came a bit early, they have to wait. Another one is the ball on shipboard, and here you have a fragment showing in close-up two ladies wearing identical clothes. They might be close friends, they might be sisters. Anyway, for some reason they chose to wear identical dresses. They are what you might call early bustle dresses, and the occasion is a fashionable ball on board of a yacht or a ship, so something that the high society could sometimes do. Another one here on the Thames, so we have a fashionably dressed woman. Actually, she's wearing this natural form dress we will discuss later. Here we have another in the conservatory showing two young women. This fragment, again, wearing identical clothes, and one of them is actually sitting. This is a rare occasion that you can see a sitting figure wearing a bustle dress or a bunch of lilacs. Again, a woman probably at home in the conservatory, wearing a beautifully decorated bustle dress. So here we have those images by James, originally Jacques, but he changed his name to English version Tissot. And let us now look at the fashion plates themselves.